Welcome to today's presentation. This is Selena here, and we are with natural solutions for hormonal imbalances. I want to get started here. We have a lot to cover today. So first, we got to go over the disclaimer. This presentation is designed for educational purposes only and is not engaged in rendering medical advice, legal advice, or professional services. If you feel that you have a medical problem, you should seek the advice of your physician or healthcare practitioner. So I'm also going to jump in here. And who am I? My name is Selena Rothenberger. I am the founder of the Functional Perspective and the Functional Health Mama. I'm a graduate of Functional Medicine University with a certification in functional medicine, and graduate of Dr. Sears Health and Wellness Institute with certification in health and wellness coaching. I'm a mother of 6 with 2 surviving children, one of those with an autoimmune disease. I specialize in helping those who suffer with gastrointestinal and autoimmune disorders learn natural healing methods so they can regain their health and vitality. And the core values here at the Functional Perspective and Functional Health Mama are: 1, all diseases have a root cause; and 2, that you, the individual, are the one who determines the outcome; and 3, that we don't diagnose or treat disease. Those things are at the end of the equation. That's not the problem. We help co-create health by helping you to get to that root. We basically, the core of what we do is to empower individuals so that you can take charge of your health. Everything we do revolves around that. And so what we're going to cover today is hormones 101. What are hormones? The key shifts that we need to identify the underlying cause of our hormonal imbalances, and the foundation to how do we restore hormonal balance and have healthy hormones. So what are hormones? The body produces hormones to serve as the body's messengers to assist in function and regulation of different things such as our metabolism and breathing, sleeping, reproduction, stress, growth, and even our mood. And so there's a lot of hormones in our body. But today we're going to really focus on the female sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So first we're going to look at overall what is the endocrine system and how this really works. The endocrine glands produce hormones either to stimulate another gland, or they're going to stimulate an end gland to produce hormones. And we have something called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. The hypothalamus will produce things like CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. That's going to stimulate the pituitary to release the corticotropin. That's a very mouth, one of those tongue twisters, the ACTH hormone, which is going to stimulate the adrenal gland to release cortisol. There's feedback loops involved. And what that means is that cortisol can also kind of help send a signal to whether or not we're needing more or less. We see this also like in thyroid hormone. The TSH is a kind of a temperature gauge to say, hey, is our body saying it needs more or less? The hypothalamus also produces the gonadotropin releasing hormone. The pituitary then sends out to release FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, the LH that sends the ovary to release estrogen and testosterone. And again, there's these feedback loops involved. So it's really important when we're looking at our hormones to look at the entire big picture and not just focus on one hormone. We see that in thyroid a lot of, oh, we're just going to only focus on the TSH. And while, yes, that can tell us a lot, it doesn't tell us everything, because there can still be imbalances of certain hormones can look like, hey, it's a normal, but really things are abnormal. It's really, really vital when we're looking at our female hormones also to look at that bigger picture. Because that bigger picture really starts that all of these steroid hormones are made from cholesterol. There's a series of enzymatic steps where cholesterol is converted down into pregnenolone, and that's considered the mother of all the hormones because that has the potential to be converting to many, many, many other hormones. And so this kind of is an overview of that, of how the cholesterol and how that those pathways work and the steps and what one step leads to the next step. And so it's important that we understand when it comes to our female hormones that one thing can affect another. And so we have, the cortisol here can affect other areas of our health. Testosterone is something really also very, very interesting when it comes to our female hormones, that about 25% of it is made in the ovaries and about 25% in the adrenals, 50% in the adipose tissue. And so again, this is another thing where it's really, really important to look at the bigger picture and to make sure we're looking at health holistically, where instead of the compartmentalized that we generally see in the conventional model. One other thing to note on this, on testosterone and on just this in general here, is about the DHEAS. And we're going to talk about stress here in a moment. But what I want you to know on the DHEAS is that is pretty much only made in the adrenals. And so when we go to test for cortisol, if you ever heard of like, you know, a chronic fatigue, or you have like a adrenal test, or they're checking your cortisol, you want to make sure that you're having your DHEAS also tested. A lot of times they will test the DHEA, and while that can be helpful, just note that it's not all in the adrenals. So some of that also comes from the ovaries. And so I really want to just make sure that you're noting on that to also look into the DHEAS when you're looking at adrenal health. So the messengers that we're going to really look at today are estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. These kind of make up the core of the female hormone functions. And so how do each of these function is really kind of important. If we're going to start looking at why there's an imbalance, we got to know what it is that they actually do. So estrogen is one of those that stimulates the growth of tissue. In the brain, it helps to boost the synthesis and function of our neurotransmitters. It helps to maintain our bone density, increases blood flow to dilate the small arteries, inhibits the platelet stickiness. It helps to also maintain the collagen in our skin and helps us with our memory and fine motor skills, prevents muscle damage and helps us maintain muscle and improves our sleep and mood. There's just a lot of things that estrogen does. It's really, really important that we have a really good balance on estrogen, because estrogen also can lead to the cancer side of things. And so this is one of the things where it does a lot of wonderful, wonderful things. But again, it's really important to always have this stuff in balance. So progesterone, the functions of that is primarily made in the corpus luteum after ovulation. And a small amount of it is made in the adrenal gland. And it helps to ensure the development and function of the breast and the female reproductive tract. And it's also going to, in the brain, it helps to bind to different receptors. It's going to help exert a calming and sedative effect. It's also a diuretic through the stimulation of another receptor. And like I said, it has a very good calming and sedative effect. Testosterone. So we often think of this one as, okay, this is an enhancement of libido and sexual response. But there's so many other things that it also does. It helps to strengthen ligaments, build muscle tissue, our strength and stamina, assist brain function. It's associated with assertive behavior and sense of well-being. It helps to increase our bone and mineral density and prevent further decline into osteoporosis. And so these three hormones really are key at looking at keeping things in balance and keeping optimal health as women as we go on. So balance is the key when it comes to all three of these. So how do we know if we have an imbalance? That's when you need to start looking at that bigger picture and the different patterns involved. And so when it comes to the female hormones, there's patterns. For instance, we have the estradiol, the estrogen things that happen earlier in the follicular phase of our cycle. Then we have ovulation, and progesterone is after. It tends to rise after. So when we see these things where they're not following that pattern, we realize that, hey, we have an imbalance. Then we have to start asking that question, why? What's going on? And we start tracing things upstream. And what are some different things that can lead to imbalances there? Insulin resistance is one of the big things, and we see this a lot, especially here in the US, is insulin resistance. And how the way that works is that it's going to create something called hyperinsulinemia, which can lower our sex hormone binding globulin, that's the SHBG, which can lead to an increase in testosterone, which can lead to anovulation, which we're not ovulating, which leads to lower progesterone. And then we can kind of get into a really bad catch-22 cycle where it can be self-perpetuating. And so we always have to ask the question, why? So we have low progesterone. Instead of running out and just going and getting progesterone, we just need to start going back upstream and tracing to what causes low progesterone. What's the signals to our body that says that going to have low? Let's go there and keep tracing that back up. Giving progesterone without addressing the reason why may help very temporarily, but I've never seen it help long term. It's sort of like we have to stop putting the gas on the fire if we want to put the fire out. So this is another thing that's important to really understand when it comes to our female hormones and all hormones in general is stress. And why this is so important and how this affects us is because stress goes down that pathway. It's going to go down there to the cortisol. So it's going to take the nutrients and what we're using to make those female hormones. Well, guess what? The stress trumps all of that. And stress trumps a lot of things. We have something called the sympathetic state and the parasympathetic state. The sympathetic state is that stressful state, that fightful, run from a lion state. That parasympathetic is that peaceful state. So I always, it's easier to remember those, the S, stressful, P, peaceful. And so if we are constantly in that sympathetic state where we're running from a lion, we're diverting not just the hormones, but the other cofactors, the vitamins and minerals, the nutrients that go along with these processes, because these processes all take vitamins and minerals and nutrients to make those things work, for these enzymes to work, for these things to be produced. And so that's why stress is so important when it comes to rebalancing hormones. We have to address that, or again, it goes to that question why we're not going to have enough cofactors. Our body can't make it whenever we're diverting cofactors. And this is another really nice chart that kind of shows how there's these different feedbacks and where things are bidirectional, where different signals go back and forth. And that's where it gets to be where if we just start to replace like one thing, how it affects more things. And that's why, you know, I'm just not an advocate of just let me just go take a pill for whatever this test result comes back because I have a deficiency in, because we got to look at all the different feedbacks that happen because of where that nutrient or where that hormone, whatever it is, especially when it comes to hormones. I'm not really a fan of replacing hormones without looking at that bigger picture. So how do you know if you have a hormonal imbalance? Well, I know if you're a woman, you guys know if you have a hormonal imbalance. In the same way we feel that, hey, our instinct says, hey, I feel there's something wrong, that's a hormonal imbalance. And so it's difficult because a lot of times we are just blown off, or we're just told, oh, it's just your hormones. And so you have all these symptoms and we're just supposed to deal with that. And this is just a very, very small list. I mean, we all know that there's this plethora of symptoms that can happen that lead to hormonal imbalance, or a symptom, a sign of a hormonal imbalances. And so what do we do about that? You know, what can we do? That's what we're here today for, right? That's what we came here for, was to say, what can we do to shift our hormones and get them back naturally? Well, first off, one is we have to at least acknowledge that, you know what, the modern medicine is failing us when it comes to these things. It's not equipped, it's not designed. The doctors are simply just not trained to put things into context. They just are not trained in to say, okay, how does your female hormones connect to your gut health? How does it connect to the toxins in your home, the relationships, your job, all of those kinds of things? It's just not that way. It's an emergent care model. It's an acute care model. So it has amazing things that it does. It's a wonderful at acute situations and emergency situations, but it doesn't help us with these chronic situations because it's just not, that doctors are just not taught how to connect the dots. So that's what we need to rethink. What is medicine? What is food? What's disease, genetics, epigenetics, all of those kinds of things? What are those? And you take that step back and look at, okay, wait a second here. We go back to natural medicine that's been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, that's looking at the body at why is it doing that? How does the body work? How do these things function? Going back to the biochemistry of what's going on here. And there's two questions that's at the principal core of when we rethink this. The first is there something we need to get out of the equation here? Do we need to remove the gas from the fire? And next is, hey, do we need to put water on the fire? Is there something we need to add? Is there something that's not being met here that we need to add? So anything that I do, I'm always asking those two questions. Is there something that needs to be taken away? Is it something that truly needs to be added? And that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to now go replace all the hormones that come out of balance and all the vitamin nutrition deficiencies, start taking all these supplements for that. That's not what that means when it says we need to add something. We need to look and see what is the body really truly missing that it's deficient in. So there's three kind of the core of those. Even when we go to that, is there's our biochemistry that's going on, all that chemical self underneath the surface, our physical self, and then our spiritual self and our mental health, emotional health. All of those things, we need to look at them and put them into context and see how they all are related to one another. And so that biochemistry is kind of where a lot of times we start in that physical self. And it comes to that gasoline in our vehicles, putting gas in our cars. We make sure we have good quality gas in our cars. We don't put water or Gatorade in our vehicle and expect it to run. We're going to make sure we're putting in good quality gas. So the same when it comes to our bodies. We want to make sure that we're getting the nutrients we need. And so when it comes to our hormones, it's not just the signaling from, the pituitary that's sending out these signals. For those things to make the hormones, for the pituitary to make all those things, and for each hormone to be made, there's other cofactors involved. We got to make sure that it has all the building blocks needed. And so, looking at things like our vitamin D, our vitamin B12, zinc, pretty much all of our trace minerals. I should just put trace minerals up there. Omega-3 fatty acids, and the number one, hydration, water. We've got to make sure we're hydrated. Looking at nutrient deficiencies and addressing those. And by that, I don't mean run out and get vitamin D, run out and get vitamin B12. I see this, the vitamin B when I see the vitamin D as well, but the vitamin B when I especially see because I'm into the genetics component, and there's a lot of MTHFR. And so people say, oh, I have MTHFR. I have to go take all these methylated vitamins, whether it's methylfolate or methyl B12. And I just can't stress enough how that can really cause a lot more problems. And again, it goes back to why, what, and how. Why would there be a vitamin B12 deficiency? How does the body make it? You know, what leads to a B12 deficiency? And so when we're looking at just the B12, we have 3 cycles that are really tightly woven. And one is not even on here. You have your methylation cycle, which is kind of your methionine folate cycle, the biotin cycle, which is your neurotransmitter cycle, and then you have your transsulfuration, which is your detox cycle. The 3 of those work so tightly together. It's really important to look at all of those to see what's going on when it comes to B12, because there's a lot of feedback that goes on, just like we have in the hormones. The same thing goes on when we're producing these different enzymes, and when these genes are working, there's a lot of feedback and communication going on here. So we have to ask why, which leads to our gut, because that's where a lot of it starts, right? That's kind of the key, and that's the entry point to getting that fuel to our system, you know, is through our gut, through our GI tract. So our gut functions on so many different things. It's much more than just digestion. We have an immune response, we've got hormone regulation, we have for detoxification, for producing vitamins, for our neurotransmitters, for, you know, we have to make sure that our gut is working well. So how can we do that? What are ways that we can address our gut thing? The first thing is I want to look at, okay, what's going on in our diet? Because what kind of fuel are we putting in our diet? Are we making sure that we are getting a variety of foods that are supporting for health? Getting that rainbow of foods, you know, making sure that we're having a good breakfast and lunch and dinner. And yes, then we can also have desserts. Everything in moderation, making sure there's healthy desserts ideally. Because the more that we're putting in that good fuel, the better our engine is going to run. You know, when we're putting in not so good food, we're not going to have a good running engine. And so that also leads to fasting. Fasting is a wonderful way to help support our body in healing. But when it comes to our hormones, we have to actually be very, very careful with that as well. We have to be very aware that fasting can also lead to exacerbating some of our hormonal imbalances. If you have thyroid hormone imbalances, that one's something you have to really navigate very carefully, because fasting can contribute to the reverse T3. And I know we're not really talking about the thyroid today, but just to note that fasting has a lot of wonderful, very, very healing benefits. It's very beneficial for activating something called mTOR autophagy. It's going to activate the autophagy, turn off the mTOR. We need both of those things. We just need them in balance. So fasting is huge. I've promoted fasting. I just want to just caution about overusing fasting. I just sense that it's potential that there can be a problem when we have hormonal imbalances. It's just another thing in the equation to look at, because fasting can kind of put us in that sympathetic state. And so while it can also be very beneficial, we just got to be careful with that. So just making sure that if you're utilizing fasting, that you're listening to your body. And if it's making things worse, don't do fasting just because fasting is supposed to be great. Okay, so that's my spiel on fasting. I love it, but just making sure that we're getting a really good variety of foods. So how can we know that? Because before we supplement with a supplement, we want to make sure we have a good foundation. You know, if our house has the framework is falling apart, putting a new roof on it is really not going to help if the walls are falling down. If we don't have a good foundation, when the foundation's all cracked, you know, putting in nice furniture, nice appliances isn't going to help if we have floors falling apart. So we got to make sure we have the foundation. The supplements are basically just kind of like the grout between the tile, or the in between the bricks, the mortar between the bricks. We don't build a house strictly out of mortar. It's just to hold the bricks together. So that's the only, the supplements. Looking at this site here, nutritiondata.self.com. It's a free site. I really, really like how we can get a really good clue as to the micronutrients. You can put in the foods that you've eaten for the day, and then or a meal, you can kind of divide up however you want. And you can see, okay, hey, what am I getting here? what did I get for today as my allowance? Was I getting enough of the B vitamins? Was I getting enough of my minerals, the proteins? You can even break it down to the different types of the different types of proteins, the different types of sugars. You can kind of see, hey, am I getting a lot of glucose, lactulose, fructose, all those kinds of things. So it's really, really good. And this is just the condensed. There's a way you can expand what I have on the screen. So I really like this. It can give you more of a better idea of, hey, look, I'm really, really deficient in folate. I need to try to get a little bit more folate in my diet before I start supplementing with folate. So the key is to first try to make sure we're getting it from our diet first. And this here is a really good way for you guys to get a clue as to, hey, what am I getting? Without having to go take a test, let's see, what am I putting in my body? Then you can look and see the test results. You need to get tests to say, oh, look, I'm putting in this much, but this here's what's, is showing an imbalance. Why is there an imbalance? It gives you help to kind of narrow down which rabbit trails you go down whenever you're looking at hormones and really delving into that. So the next thing is, okay, we have those two things, right? What we have to add things and we have to remove things. So what are some things that maybe you need to remove that's affecting, can negatively affect hormone regulation? Inflammatory foods, making sure we're getting rid of things like gluten. If you have a hormonal imbalance and pretty much across the board chronic health, gluten is very inflammatory. So until you at least get things calmed down, some people can handle gluten really, really well. But if you have hormonal imbalances and you have a lot of chronic symptoms, removing the gluten helps to tame down some of the inflammation and the immune response that your body's having to do just to deal with the gluten. Because to deal with gluten, it has to open up the tight junctions. Zonulin is released in the GI tract as part of the natural process to digest gluten. So we are setting ourselves up for leaky gut. That's what we see a lot of, why leaky gut is associated with all of these autoimmune diseases. And why gluten is removed is because gluten just naturally is going to open up those tight junctions just as part of that process. So we don't want to add more fuel to that fire. Toxins. Toxins are everywhere. And so we have to be trying to avoid toxins, especially things that are going to directly impact hormone productions like the plastics, EMFs, those sort of heavy metals. Those kinds of things are going to bind to receptors, really getting those pathways involved with hormone regulation. So removing those things and avoiding those things is really critical if you have a hormonal imbalance and you're trying to address this naturally. Excuse me. The next thing is infections or overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth. That goes back to our gut, is that do we have a war zone going on in our GI tract where instead of our body being able to digest foods, to pull out these nutrients to help our body, is it instead fighting infections, fighting with parasites, fighting with overgrowth bacteria, those sorts of things? So we're getting those things out of the way, removing that, adding fuel to the fire is key and important in looking at our gut when we're looking at hormones. We have to go to our gut. Food allergies and food sensitivities is something else to look into. Is sometimes we have sensitivities and allergies that we just didn't really know about. So there's one of the easy ways to do that is to do an elimination diet and to take away the top offending foods that, like gluten and dairy and soy. Eggs is another one that's a big one a lot of times. And see, hey, how do I feel? You can also do testing on that. I like the Dunwoody Labs testing, has both the IgE, IgG, plus the complement, several different types of allergic and sensitivity type responses. So you're going to get a really pretty broad picture on that. But the key to the allergies is we have to address the leaky gut component as well, because we're going to have, if we have a leaky gut, we're going to have food sensitivity and allergies because food's getting where it shouldn't be. So our body's going to elicit a response. So removing those foods, if we don't address the reason why there's an allergic response and sensitivity, we can oftentimes just basically shift around the allergies that, I tested fine here, I removed, and I started eating these other foods. Well, now I'm allergic to those foods. And so you just kind of just shift because the original offending reason why was never addressed. Other things that you can do to look at, okay, what could potentially be fuel on your fire are your blood chemistry. Your CBC has a lot of clues in it. And you've probably been told that, hey, those are normal. That's what my users say, hey, those are normal. Well, they are common. That normal is common, but it's not necessarily optimal. So we have to look at what is actually healthy for normal. That's really a very deceitful and disservice to us saying these lab results when they come back, oh, that's the normal ranges. I think that's really been a detriment to why we have such chronic health situations, because we've just been told that we're normal for so long. And a couple other tests are comprehensive stool analysis and organic acid testing. And I should have put on here the Dutch test. I'm not sure why I thought I had the Dutch test on here. The Dutch test is a dried urine test for hormones, and it's a really, really good test. It kind of has a lot of organic acid type markers as well. Those are really good tests to look at. Okay, why is there a problem? And maybe even heavy metal testing. With heavy metal testing, I just would be very cautious on the chelation. So a lot of times they will promote chelating, and I'm not really a big promoter of chelating until we have first made sure that the detox pathways are working well. And usually if we are suspect of heavy metals, probably that detox pathway is way overburdened. I don't want to overburden it more, because what happens is we get in that situation very much like trying to use a clogged toilet. Not really a pretty sight. And so I'm just not really a fan of the chelating. I'll do the heavy metal testing, just not through chelation. And so what we have next here, toxic overload. Yes, because toxins are more than just the foods. We have hidden toxins everywhere. Pesticides, GMOs, air pollutants, the heavy metals, chemical contaminants all over the place. But emotional stress and toxic relationships are some of the biggest toxins that are affecting our hormone health. And so if you've been eating all the right foods and doing all the right things, please make sure that you're looking at, is there emotional stress? Emotional trauma from past is a huge, huge driving factor in a lot of hormonal imbalances, especially in women. Pregnancy losses, those kinds of things, or any kind of family emotional stresses, job stresses, all of those things affect our hormones in a really, really profound way. So I really encourage you that if you're struggling with your hormone balance, to really make sure that you're taking time for self-care, which we're going to touch on here in just a minute here. There's another thing that we can look at is seed balancing for helping with hormone rebalancing. This isn't very common, but basically it's looking at the seeds and what they provide and how they support the different phases of the cycle. So the follicular phase corresponds with days 1 through 14. It's that first part of your cycle. And it's during that time whenever flax seeds and pumpkin seeds are basically equal parts of those, a tablespoon of each. And then during the luteal phase, which is that second half of your cycle, and after you've ovulated, is the sunflower seeds and sesame seeds. And so that's a natural method to consider that, okay, if you're looking to help try to balance your hormones out, this is something that can be beneficial to try. Sleeping. So now we're getting to that stress component, why that stress is so important, that we're addressing things like sleep. So we're really getting to now that foundational things. Like you probably already know the things we've talked about just up to this point. You probably know all of these, but I just really want to really stress these final things we're going to talk about, because these really help to set that stage of that parasympathetic state and that sympathetic state. We've got to engage that parasympathetic state. We have to engage that. If we don't, we can be eating all the right foods and doing all those right things, and all we're doing is we're just fueling that fight or flight mode. We're just kind of perpetuating that chronic situation that we're in. So the sleep, we have to make sure that we are being intentional, taking time to sleep, establishing a pattern, a dark room, using our bedroom just for sleep and romance only, not doing, having the TV and watching TV and avoiding caffeine before bedtime and alcohol, making sure we're not eating right before bed, and that we're not exercising vigorously, right before bed, because that's going to ramp up cortisol. So whenever we need to kind of get back to where we're shifting into that cycle, that circadian rhythm, and going to sleep whenever it's dark outside. We, getting our lights away from the blue lights. Those sorts of things disrupt our hormonal patterns, including our female hormones. And then we can also use supportive herbs. But the herbs, again, if we don't address the reasons why, it's going to make it, the herbs can be helpful. We have to make sure we're looking at things holistically. But there are some great herbs to use to help to generate sleep. A lot of times we hear about like lavender. Cayenne actually is one that works really, really well in many situations because it helps with our circulation. So now we can actually get things going. Other people with cayenne is going to help to stimulate, and it wakes them up way too much. But there's a lot of different herbs you can try. But again, I'm just very cautious on saying, oh, go take this herb for that. I'm just not that type to say, oh, take this for that. So we have to look at the bigger picture. And the way I like to use herbs to say, okay, hey, how can we support the body where it's missing things? We've given the good foundation. Which herbs do we need to use to fill in that little mortar between the bricks? Movement. So movement is also really, really important. When we have hormonal imbalances, usually less is best. We don't want to go into a lot of extraneous exercise because it's going to go to that cortisol. And we saw in that first, in the beginning, when we had those big charts for that, the pregnenolone can go down the cortisol. That really, really strenuous, heavy exercise, long exercise is going to really fuel that cortisol component. And so it's going to potentially take away from us feeding our female hormones. So just making sure we're keeping it in balance. Resting in between, like we're going to do exercise in which we have rest in between them. Working multiple different types of muscle groups, doing them on different days. We're not doing, really, really strenuous full body workouts all the time. Yoga is another really, really nice way to enhance our hormones. Anything that's going to help to engage that parasympathetic state. And then making sure that we are consuming and putting in the right fuels. Whenever we're doing exercise, we're going to engage in movement, making sure we're providing our body with the electrolytes, with the nutrients that it needs, so they can carry out those actions healthy without it having to pull from, things in our body and diverting things over just because it has to get through whatever that movement. And so making sure we're giving it the fuel that it needs for the exercising. Alcohol and hormones. Moderate drinking really shouldn't have a drastic effect on your hormone levels, but because all our bodies are different, what's moderation for you may be different than moderation for me. And again, it goes back to also looking at that bigger picture. If there's hormonal imbalances, then we also know that most of that goes through our liver. Alcohol has to go through our liver. So it's going to potentially add an extra burden on our liver, which we don't want to add if we're already having hormonal imbalances. So just making sure that we are looking at that bigger picture and looking to see how is alcohol affecting us? Is it having an effect on our hormones? Because that pathway, again, that toilet example, we have to be careful of. Acupuncture is a wonderful way, a natural way to help with rebalancing hormones. There's so many benefits of acupuncture, so it's going to have to really influence those levels of the FSH and LH to help regulate that communication that's going on between the brain and the ovaries. We're in that pattern that we saw where we had in the beginning, we had the estrogen and the progesterone. There's a lot of communication that goes on for those things to happen. So the acupuncture helps to support that communication. It helps to support the thyroid function. And the thyroid function, again, also helps to work in harmony with our female production. Helps to balance out the estrogen and progesterone, promotes the ovulation. It helps to increase the blood flow in the uterus. And that's one of the key things with many of the natural approaches, that we are increasing oxygen and increasing the blood flow. And that's basically saying, hey, we're taking away a clogged filter in our fuel system. Like if we are increasing the amount of fuel that gets to our car, to the engine, then our engine is going to run better. If we have a clogged fuel filter, it's not going to run so well. The same with our bodies. And we're increasing that blood flow and increasing where our body can get the nutrients to where it needs to go. It has profound effects. And sometimes it's just simple things as that, as our body just needs to get some of this clogged stuff, remove these clogged filters, get things moving, things start going better. It's the same thing like with streams. I've used the illustration where we have like a creek in a stream. When it's stagnant, the things that happen is not really very, very pretty. But when we have a creek where it's moving and really free flowing, it's alive and it's vibrant. It has lots of things that are living with it, but we have to just get those things moving. So because of that, it just affects positive effects in so many ways with acupuncture. A soothing path to balance. So this comes to the self-care that I mentioned a few minutes ago, was about we have to take time for self-care. So if you have hormonal imbalances, again, this is the number one thing, is engaging the parasympathetic state. And so identifying what is it that you need for you. And this is where the protocols, all these latest, the different books and those kinds of things, none of them really address what is it that you need. And so I'm not really a fan of many protocols. My protocols are all very, very individual. It's very unique to what you're needing. So for you, if it's, spending time, out taking hikes and walks, do more of that. If it's time spending just meditating, do more of that. It's listening to music. If it's, spending time with friends, if it's out gardening, horseback riding, bicycling, whatever it helps to engage that parasympathetic state, that's what we need to do. We need to find and be intentional of that and schedule that. If it's difficult for you to schedule. It's one of the things that is difficult for me and I struggle with is I have to be very intentional with my self-care. So I literally will put it on my calendar and I have it scheduled as an appointment as if I have a client that, okay, that is my self-care client. So, oh, that's me. And so that's what I have to do for me. So if that's what you have to do, then do that. Give yourself permission to take care of yourself. And that's the thing is for me was giving myself permission to put myself first. Put on your oxygen mask first. And so we hear that all the time in the airplanes. But if we are not taking care of ourselves, our hormones, how can they do what they need to do? Our body can't do what it needs to if we're not being intentional about saying, okay, I'm going to step back and take time. So this really is one of the kind of make it or break it. If we are not putting self-care, if we're not addressing stresses and making sure that we are looking into emotional stresses, toxins, molds, all of those kinds of things, whatever anything that could stress our body, which there's a huge list of things that can stress it. If we're not addressing those and taking that fuel away from the fire, we will be chasing protocols, we'll be chasing symptoms, we'll be taking supplements and going merry-go-rounds on, they work, they don't work, I'm worse now. Those kind of just see it all the time. So this is a huge, huge, huge component. I cannot stress it enough about how important it is to making sure that we are taking time for self-care. The next one that goes right in harmony with that is laughter. It's celebration. It is vital that we are making sure that we have laughter. One thing that I do have on every protocol of mine is laughter. And that one is pretty much the beginning and end of any protocol is saying, okay, we have to have laughter. We have to have joy. We have to engage that. So finding what it is that makes you happy, what makes you laugh. And, having laughter with friends and family does amazing, amazing things. And especially when it comes to hormones, is again, that cortisol, remember that cortisol that we saw, we're not engaging cortisol when we're laughing and we're having fun and we're relaxing and we're doing those kinds of things, that cortisol shut off. And so that gives our body then the ability to utilize those nutrients and utilize those upstream hormones to go make our female hormones, to go make progesterone, to go make estrogen, to make the testosterone, to make those things that we need for that versus the cortisol. So laughter and self-care are the key to rebalancing our hormones. And if you're having struggles still, what are your action steps? What are the things, okay, hey, what do you need to do here? Of course, we got to get rid of the junk foods, right? We have to make sure we are eating real foods, whole foods, avoiding gluten, sugars and processed foods. We have to make sure that we are eating good quality foods and giving our body what it needs. Making sure we're staying hydrated adequately and getting the trace minerals. Trace minerals is a key when it comes to our hormones, selenium and zinc, magnesium, the iron, copper balance, making sure that we have those things all in balance. Deep breathing, that breathing helps to deliver oxygen and the nutrients to where they need to go. It helps to get the things running well. The deep breathing, with our circulation system. Exercise appropriately, that we're not overdoing it. Whenever we have a hormonal imbalance, that we are not overstressing our body and shifting too much into that cortisol pathway. Connecting with others in our sleep, resting when we need it, giving ourselves permission to rest. If we're tired, then that's our body giving us a signal saying, hey, I don't have the energy right now. Finding a hobby, things that you love, engaging time in those, and do what makes you feel happy. Doing things that bring laughter and joy to your life and to your days, because that's going to, again, shift that cortisol. So what do you do if you're doing these things and what, I'm still having problems. There's something I just can't figure out what it is. There's a stressor in my body that apparently there's still fuel being thrown on the fire. And you're doing all these things. Take a very, very thorough history. Go back and look at your history. And this is why I really encourage if you say, hey, I've been doing all these things, I'm still having problems. Get with a practitioner, give me a call. I do free consults, complimentary consults. We can kind of go over and let's look at a big snapshot here and help get you moving forward. You've got to look at a big history and look at all those different events throughout your life, at what's happened. When was the last time you did feel well? That's a great starting point. Then start looking, okay, what tests do we need to do? And let's try to find the opportunities of healing, because the symptoms, if we're still having symptoms, that's our body's sign saying, hey, that's the warning light. There's a problem here. And so we need to support that battle, whatever battle it is fighting inside. We need to support it so that it can heal. That's how the body heals, is by going through that process. And so to develop an empowerment, a strategy that's going to empower you so that, hey, you can overcome this. Lab testing that you can do, the basic general labs, like you have like your vitamin D, the iron panels. Make sure you do the iron panel that you're going to get it also with the ferritin. There's a lot of, a lot of these panels that you will do, you need to kind of get the extended panel. I'll just do like, their general panel, but you kind of want to get the extra add-ons to that. Your CBC, your homocysteine, that's one going to help you with knowing that they're methylation. And the methylation ties right into your female hormone production. So if you have homocysteine that's out of balance, and again, that's one that's really important to be working with someone who understands what's a healthy range of homocysteine, because the normal lab range of homocysteine is not healthy range. You really need it closer to around the 6 to 7. And I think the lab ranges usually are between like 4 to 12 or 4 to 15, which are just way too high and too low. You need to have it in a balance. Your A1C, to make sure your blood sugar regulation. That's where we have that example of the insulin resistance and how that can really create a lot of problems with our female hormones. The high sensitivity C-reactive protein, a lot of times they will check the C-reactive protein. This is an inflammatory marker. You want the HSCRP, the high sensitivity C-reactive protein. Your fasting insulin, getting, kind of understanding whether or not you have, what's your fasting insulin, not just your fasting glucose, but your fasting insulin. And then the thyroid panel. And again, this is one that you want the extended thyroid panel with the whole gamut, not just the TSH. They'll do like the TSH and T3, T4. You want like the free T3, the reverse T3, the free T4, and then the antibodies that go along with that. So those are like a lot of the general testing that you can do. And then the advanced testing, and these are the simpler ones, are like your organic acid test, your stool test. I really like the GI map. And I did put the Dutch hormone on here. And then methylation markers. There's a methylation test through doctor's data, which is going to check your methionine, SAMe, which gives you a lot more details than just the homocysteine. The homocysteine is kind of a very broad picture. The methylation panel through doctor's data gives you a lot more details on that whole cycle. And then a Dutch hormone panel is a really good panel to say, hey, what's going on with my hormones? And that can give you more insights too. Some of those pathways, like that neurotransmitter pathway, that biotin pathway, there's a gene called the COMT, and that's your catecholamine methyltransferase gene, and that's going to process your catecholamines. And so that's where you need the Dutch test, is really helpful in understanding some of that. So those are some tests that you can do on those. Pretty much, I think most of those you can get, maybe not the Dutch one on your own. There are places where you can get those on your own, or to make sure you're working with a practitioner that understands how to put these things all into context. I do have also a discovery guide that I will send you guys a link to. You can message me if you guys need a link to that, where it kind of goes through a lot of what we covered here, and has the list of the different tests you can do, some symptom checkers to kind of check some of your symptoms and those sort of things, and ways to create a strategy plan of, okay, what can you do to move forward? Where are your opportunities for regaining health? So if you have any questions, reach out to me. I know we did covered a lot here today. I love talking with you guys and helping you guys. Just the one thing to remember is to, one, trust your guys' instinct. If you feel like there's a problem, trust that instinct there is, and that you don't have to just accept these hormonal imbalances just because you're a woman and just because you're getting older. That those are actually a lot of clues to us, and there's a lot of things that we can do to restore health and function. We just have to change the perspective that we're coming from, and change the questions that we're asking, and put everything into context instead of all in its own little box. This has been great. Again, I hope you guys have a great day. And if you have any questions, you feel free to reach out to me. You all take care.